Welcome to Alabama Care, everybody. Today I have Nicky Watkins, who is a peer advocate, and Heather Sims, who is the Information and Referral Specialist. And today we will be talking about information and referral services and independent living skills training. And I will turn it over to them so that they can introduce themselves.
Hi, so I'm Heather Sims, and I am the Information and Referral Specialist for Disability Rights and Resources. I have been with the organization now for 16 years, and over the past 16 years, I have worn many different hats within the organization, but I have been information and referral for the last, I think, going on 4 years now. So, that's a little bit about who I am and what I do.
Hi, I'm Nicky Watkins. My pronouns are they, them. I've been at Disability Rights and Resources for, it'll be 2 years in October, at the beginning of October. So I've been in advocacy a bit longer than that, and I got to give a shout out to Heather on this call too, because she really taught me how to do this job, and I really appreciate a lot of that. So it was helpful in the beginning. I felt a little underwater at first, even though I'd been working in disability advocacy on my own, but doing it sort of with an organization and teaching IL skills was a different thing. So I'm really grateful to my coworkers for helping me feel like I wasn't swimming without a safety net or jumping without a safety net, so to speak. I love what I do. I'm disabled myself, and it means a lot to me to be able to work with other people who are in different places in their journey of, sort of self-discovery and advocacy and speaking up for themselves and all of it. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, so my first question is, what is an information and referral specialist?
Okay, so basically, I kind of introduce disability rights and resources, who we are, what we offer, and try to see if the caller is interested in the things that we offer. A lot of times, it is people that don't know exactly where to turn. They are either have been disabled for their whole lives, or maybe newly acquired disabilities, and just trying to navigate the world as a disabled individual, and they don't know exactly where to turn for the services that they need. So they will call us um, to start out with, and some of the time I can link them up with our staff, such as Nikki, or other staff that can get them started with what they want to do or learn. And then if it's something that's not something that we offer, then I talk to them about what we do offer, let them know that we are here for them. If they do experience something where they do want to participate in our services, we're always here. And 50% of our staff and board are also people with disabilities, which makes people more comfortable in talking with us. And then if it is not something we offer, like housing, for example, we are um, a non-residential organization, which means that we have absolutely nothing to do with housing. However, folks can talk to me, and I can provide them with housing listings and kind of next steps to gaining housing, such as, once I provide the listings, then you call the places you most want to live. You get on their waiting list. Go ahead and ask them if they can make out an application to start working on, things of that nature. And I try to give people at least 3 resources, so that I'm not like saying, this place over here is the best, or that one, so that it gives them a choice Sometimes though, that's a hard thing. You can, like there may only be one point that you need to refer them to. And so, when that's the case, I do let them know. There's only one resource for that request, and I am good about making sure if they're comfortable emailing, or if I need to send them out a packet of information, because a lot of folks, fall into the technology gap where they're not as comfortable with, with technology as some of us are. So I do try to be as accommodating for folks as I can be.
Right. What kind of info and referral services do you provide, and can you give some examples?
Okay, so information and referral is kind of like all over the map. It just kind of depends on what somebody is looking for. So I guess some examples, some top examples. I know that's later down in the thing, but some top examples are a lot of times people will call us for affordable, accessible housing. And that's not something that we provide, but we do have listings. And then we have like Nikki, who then can, if it's a person who needs assistance with filling out applications, or like navigating getting on the housing list, like if making a phone call is something that is a challenge for somebody, then she can come alongside them and work with them on like a script, and like here's how you make that phone call. And when she does in-office appointments, she can actually sit with somebody who is trying to work on the skill of using the phone again, because some cases there are people that they have had long spans where they haven't had a phone for whatever reason, and kind of navigating those steps is kind of difficult. So she can help with those kinds of things. She's kind of like my wing woman, um, for lack of better terms. She comes in after I give them the information and kind of helps to boost their confidence where they may not have confidence in speaking up over the phone or speaking up for themselves. She can kind of help with those kinds of things, and she'll kind of go into more detail about that. But housing is a top one, and then utility and rental assistance is another one that's been really big, especially during the course of the pandemic. That is not something that we do, but I do have resources of agencies that do provide those services. Just again, there could be some red tape involved in making the connection with the organizations. And so again, that is something that you know that the person has to be, I encourage them to keep notes, when to call back if they haven't heard from somebody. Like give them, make sure you listen to whatever the voicemail says, make sure you leave the information that they need, and make sure you give them ample time to respond. And then if you haven't heard back from them, give them a call back, make sure you leave a detailed message, those kinds of things. And it kind of gives people, something to work on, something to work towards their larger goal, of, for example, moving out or whatever the case is. And so that's a big one. And then, you know, um, we've gotten a lot of calls recently of people that are experiencing long-term symptoms, or long-term uh, long-term effects from having COVID-19, and they're trying to navigate the system for the first time. Newly being a newly acquired person with a disability, and so we're trying to figure out what resources are out there to assist them. And Those are kind of big ones. I would say housing, rental assistance, utility assistance, and COVID-19 long haulers are big right now. And it just kind of depends. At times, transportation can be a big one. And that's also hard too because you have like the city areas, they have a couple of different transit options. But then when you get into the more rural locations, it's more difficult to find transportation. So
Right.
that's been a big one during the course of the pandemic as well.
So how are these services delivered? Like, do you do them over the phone or in person or both?
Most of what I do is done over the phone or via email, or send out mailed packets of information to people's US addresses or PO boxes. So um, I don't meet with people as much in person.
Gotcha.
I do more so in non-COVID times. It have some during the pandemic, mostly because sometimes you get into a situation where someone needs an in-person signature on housing forms, and we've done kind of like a safe drop-off, like through the door, those kinds of things. Definitely the thing I've missed the most during the pandemic is the face-to-face, though, because I think with independent
Right.
living work, yeah, like it's just I certainly bond with people over the phone. Like I've had great conversations with people over the phone, but it's not the same as being able to see body language and see what makes someone uncomfortable or what makes someone, happy, and you miss out on a lot. And I think one of the things that I think makes us unique as an agency is that so many of our staff have disabilities. So when I go to meet people face to face, not only can they see that, but we sit down more like having a conversation over coffee than like, let me come interview you in this government office, right? And on the phone, you don't quite get that same vibe. So it's one thing I really miss.
Yeah, I feel like independent living skills, like the training part, would be easier in person also.
Yeah, for sure. There's some of it that can like go over the phone, like thinking about like budgeting and planning for housing and those kinds of things kind of translate okay to phone conversations. But we've talked about this one before too, like learning to cook with accommodations is not really happening over the phone. I mean, maybe over
Right.
video, but that's still not the same.
Let's see. So how do you keep track of all the info out there?
Okay,
And this is
so
for Heather.
so we we as an agency do something really cool. We are tasked with doing outreach events, and so when a staff person does an outreach event, we will share across the staff, so that anybody that talks to somebody that needs something, whether or not they hear my lovely voice in their ear or one of the other staff members, um, they will get the same information. I mean, anybody can do INR. Like, it doesn't have to just be me. And because we can all do it, then somebody can be talking to our employment specialist and get information about other things, without him having to say, "Oh, well, that's not really my area. You need to call Heather for that." Like, we all have a resource binder that we can pull from, but I use the internet a lot, and with my expertise, they're kind of go-to one resources, so to speak, that I can off the top of my head give somebody. And now if it's something that I don't typically hear or that I'm not really sure of, I don't say, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't do that," and hang up. I tell them, let me do some digging, and I will get back with you. And I usually give them a time frame in which they should hear back from me, either via phone or via email, with an answer. Either I found a resource, or I'm sorry, I did I did all the research for you, but right now I don't have anything available. But if I do, I will make sure to reach back out to you, and that way they know that I've heard them, I've heard their request, and I want to help them, and I will do what I can. But sometimes there's just not anything out there. Like, for example, mold removal. I get a lot of calls of people that have mold in their homes. And there are programs like the critical repair program and things through the city and the county. Jefferson County also has one as well, but they do not do mold removal. And so if you've got mold removal in your home, they won't come in. And then mold removal services are pretty, extensively pricey. And so most people that we serve can't afford those types of services, and I do understand that. And so then we have to talk about, other options such as do you want resources to try to move somewhere else, or do you have a friend or family member you can stay with, or those other types of options. So it just kind of depends on what the caller needs, how we kind of find the information, and sometimes we bounce ideas off of each other. Like, we'll get a call, and we talk back and forth a lot as a staff via the Slack, and so we, or Teams, and so we'll bounce an idea off of somebody. Like, I had this call and they want such and so, and I don't have any resources for that. Are you aware of anything? And sometimes other staff members are aware of things that I may not be, and so that kind of helps as well. The team approach that we have.
I do think it's one of the bigger problems that we see overall too, that links disability to poverty is not just like the search for housing, which can be because someone has no housing, but is also often because someone has housing that they can't live in. And then there's no solution, right? Like, people will end up with houses that were their grandparents or their parents, and either they're not accessible or they are, and they have serious damage, and they go through this whole process of condemnation. But a lot of the housing crisis could be solved by making sure those houses are, like, properly maintained and restored, and different programs that we could really use for that. But
right. I'm kind of going through that. We're trying to find a house. I just moved to Georgia, and we're still trying to find a house. And trying to find an accessible house hasn't been very easy.
it was a big part of the reason for my own move too. I lived in an apartment in South Side, and there was a hill that was just basically, at this angle. And I'm a part-time wheelchair user, so trying to find a house that was flat with that I could actually get in the door and on the porch and into the driveway was a challenge in Birmingham, which is hilly. Georgia, probably exactly the same, right? Like, so yeah, and that we could afford, which is also the big part, right?
Right. So what are your top 3 call-ins?
So mostly housing. Housing is huge, and unfortunately, there is an extremely long waiting list for housing, and that is one of the tough things that I deal with on a daily basis. Is telling people I do have resource listings. However, the waiting list for housing is very, very extensive. But I am upfront and honest with people. Like, I don't just say, well, here's the listing, find where you want to live, and they'll take you when you no, that's not the way it works. Unfortunately, I wish it were. But I'm very honest with folks in that regard, and that's why I go ahead and give them like the steps to look over the listings, go ahead and call the places, make sure you keep notes of when they'll have vacancies, and things of that nature. That way, that gives them something to work on while they're feeling probably overwhelmed, kind of like I would imagine you kind of feel right now, trying to navigate your own housing search. And
Right.
so, I just try to make them, know that I understand what part of what they're going through, and im- tell them that it is a process and it is a long process, and
Mm-hmm.
I hear the frustration and I empathize with that, but right now this is all that I have. When I get new information, I'll be glad to send it to you, kind of that way. And then like I said, COVID calls are getting more of those people experiencing long-term effects from COVID and trying to navigate being newly disabled, most of them. And then, transportation's been big during the course of the pandemic. Um, so, I mean, it just kind of depends, but those, access to healthcare too has been kind of a big
Right.
thing during the course of the pandemic. Where can I get the vaccine? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Having accessible access to the vaccine, transportation to get to a vaccination site. Um, those kinds of things are kind of, I guess, hot button calls, if you will, what I'm mostly hearing.
Right. So when people call in, are the people who call a person with a disability, or are they mostly like relatives?
It just kind of depends. Um, a lot of times, people will call on behalf of someone else, but
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine. Like we don't mind that, but what we try to encourage is the person with the disability to call us, because
Right.
um like, for instance, you might call us and you might
Mm-hmm.
want something specific. Like, I'm just going to use your housing for example. You want affordable, accessible, or need affordable, accessible housing, right? And
Right.
Nicole might be your best friend or your relative, and Nicole might say, "No, I no, I think she needs this instead of that." And no, she really can't do that on her own. Well, no, we don't get to make those decisions, and a lot of times I have to have those tough conversations with people because
Right.
they want certain things for their relative or friend with a disability that their friend says, "No, I want to sit on my couch all day and eat Pringles and play Xbox. I don't want a job. I don't want to move out of my house. I don't," and so we try to encourage the person with a disability to call us, because we want to hear directly from them. We want to
Right.
hear exactly what they want, and try. And part of our thing is that we help them to come up with a plan, like housing. Um, we will help them to devise a plan to get to their overarching goal of obtaining that housing that they want or need. And so that is kind of how it's done. I mean, we, of course, we don't turn away anybody calling. We will talk to anybody, any age, for any reason. But at the end of the day, it is the person with the disability that we work with the most, to the extent that they can work with us.
Right. So what age group do you serve?
So we serve any age. We the only thing that's pertinent about receiving services from our organization Anybody can speak to me at any time for resource information. They do not have to have a disability. But one of our big things is you have to self-disclose as an individual with a disability to fully participate in the range of services that we offer through disability rights and resources. Now, if you choose as a person to say, I don't have a disability, I don't know what you're talking about, that's fine. I've had that happen a few times where at first they didn't want to admit that they had a disability. And then as we continued to talk, they became more comfortable and then said, yes, I do have a disability and this is what I want. But until they can tell you that they are a person with a disability, then they can talk to our lovely receptionist, Sparrow, or me for resource information. And then if they want to go more in depth, then they have to say they are a person with a disability, and then they can have access to the full range of our services.
Okay, what are your locations, and is it only in Birmingham?
Okay, so we primarily operate out of the Birmingham office. We do have either 4 or 5 satellite locations. And if somebody is calling out of one of the counties where a satellite office is, if the individual is meeting with people in person, then they can go to those locations and meet with somebody. But most of our staff work out of the Birmingham location and just go to those satellite locations as needed. The satellite locations are Jasper, which is Walker County, Shelby County, and I think there may be one. I think there's one in Blount County.
Aniana,
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. And so if somebody needs services in those areas, when our staff is comfortable meeting in person, we do, like, the people that are meeting in person can meet with an individual one-on-one, or like two-on-one if a person prefers to have someone with them at an appointment. Like, we don't discourage that. Like, somebody can bring a friend or family member to any or all meetings that they choose. But again, at the end of the day, it's the person with the disability that we primarily are working with. So I hope that makes sense. Like, we're based out of Birmingham, but they can travel if somebody needs for them to, and they are comfortable with meeting somebody in person.
All right. What are some examples of independent living skills training?
Okay, so I think IL skills look different across the board, and I'll start by saying too, like, nobody calls, at least it's never happened to me, nobody calls and says, I would like some independent living skills training, right? Because, like, people just don't know that phrase. A lot of the time people don't know what the independent living movement is, but it doesn't mean they don't believe in the philosophy, right? Like, of independence. It just means they don't know that term. So I'll start with talking to people a little bit about what I do, because if I were to say to someone, do you need help living independently? They'd be like, no, I can do that, right? Because it's just, that makes sense. Right. And I mean, I would probably respond the same way. But we all need help, I think, with, we're all taught, or, we learn from people around us how to manage adulthood or growing up in different ways, right? Like learning budgeting or cooking or figuring out housing, going to college, finding a job, all that stuff. And a lot of people don't learn that, right? Especially a lot of people with disabilities, right? And then often what will happen, not always, but a lot of the time what will happen is someone will lose their caretaker, or their caretaker themselves becomes disabled, or there's a lot of different circumstances, or maybe they just never learned how, right? So they'll call me and say, like, I can't navigate this Section 8 housing stuff. I can't figure out how to turn in these forms for DHR for food stamps. I don't know what they're asking of me. I don't know where to get the documents, that kind of thing. And that's where the independent living skills actually comes in, right? Like it's sort of like having those conversations one-on-one about what a person needs. And that's my job, right? Like I can help you navigate that stuff. There are always things that I have to look up and make calls and try to figure out too. I'm currently trying to figure out a housing voucher system that frankly doesn't make a lot of sense, right, to me, and it's my job. So, I mean, trying to help someone with it, it's no wonder it's a challenge for them, right? And it's not, I mean, everyone is equal in that way. I think we're all learning together. But I think the very act of learning those like solid life skills with another person who isn't, teaching them in a condescending way is really helpful, right? Because I learn at the same time. Every time someone calls, I learn something new about their story. So I think most of it that I see is related to housing, finding housing, or figuring out what the needs are once a person is in the house, especially for people with, say, traumatic brain injuries. People will need help remembering to do different tasks, right? Like take my medicine, teaching people about assistive technology for that, or even like using Siri or Alexa, those kinds of things to kind of be like, hey, remind me to take my pills. And then some of the time, I know I've helped folks with bus passes and transportation and navigating the Max bus system, which is a whole other level of bureaucracy too. Mm-hmm. So it kind of depends. Also done some cooking lessons pre-COVID, and that was, I think, the most fun, right? Because it doesn't have this sort of big, huge bureaucracy to navigate. It's just like, let's figure out how to make what you want to eat a lot of the days, and how to store food, and how to, budget for the groceries and all that stuff. And then we get to cook in the kitchen at the Disability Rights and Resources office, and that is fun. Then everyone gets to eat food. So I think that's a favorite.
Eating food is always fun.
Yes.
Okay, so I was actually looking on the website. This is where this question came from. And I saw that communication and relationships are some of the independent living skills training. And those two have probably been the biggest skills in my life. So can you speak on the importance of both and what you see at DRR helping individuals with these?
Yeah, I think this is another thing that's almost learned by doing too. Like once you are comfortable with a person, and building trust with someone takes some time, right? Like when they call, they don't know what they can say or what they'd feel comfortable saying. And most of the time the story comes out in sort of, it's either bits and pieces, or it's just like all at once information, right? And trying to figure out what to do with that and how to communicate that. I think one of the things people struggle with the most is, and I don't blame them for this at all, they'll call, say, the Medicaid office needing help with a waiver, and they will tell their entire story to the Medicaid office, and they don't care, which is sad, right? Like, I mean, it's frustrating because people should listen. But they're not used to communicating information in a way that would make the bureaucracy of it all kind of pay attention, right? To get to the heart of the need. And I think that is a struggle that we work out together, right? Like helping people decide, okay, this is what I'm going to say on this phone call, or this is what I'm going to say to this person. And feel free when you're talking to me, right, to go more in depth to talk about the story, because it's valuable to kind of get it out in the world. But how to communicate to agencies and state organizations and apartment complexes and stuff can really be a struggle for people. And it is for me too. Sometimes the anxieties are simple, right? I think about even in my own family, having folks who get really nervous at the drive-through, right? Like this sort of like on the spot moment of like communicating. It's not always like the big state bureaucracy stuff, right? Sometimes it's something small and it is really anxiety inducing, right? So just having like a trusting relationship with someone who calls and letting them know that I'm not judging them for anything they're saying or any parts of their story, I think makes people automatically get more comfortable with communicating. And then by nature, you build a relationship there, right?
Right.
I always say that my job is interesting because I don't really think of people as clients or really, I mean, I think of them, it's like building friendships and relationships in the community. And
Yeah.
everyone who calls me or talks to me is part of, my community, right? Like the disability community as a whole. So that bond, I think, immediately kind of gets formed with people. Some a little faster than others, of course, but I think that trust is really key to building those skills.
Right. Let's see. What is a skill most people ask for help with first?
I think if I would say people don't really ask for this directly, like people don't say to me, hey, help me make a list. But indirectly, people will call and say, I have all these issues, I don't know where to start. And I think that that's usually what comes up the most. Very rarely do I get a call or have a conversation with anyone who has one single issue, right? Like usually it's housing, but it's also family, but it's also poverty and SSI and, trying to navigate all of it. And it's like, what do we start with first? And we try to determine the foremost need. And it doesn't mean we don't get to the other stuff, right? But like if a person is really struggling with their health, then we start with figuring out, okay, what's the next step? Do you need to, do we need to talk to Medicaid? Do you need to get on Medicaid, or can we get you into UAB? So on, right? So I think I would argue that the thing that people need help with the most and ask for without saying the words is help prioritizing their issues, right? Like I need help figuring out where to begin because it's all too much. And I think that's fair, right? It is all too much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's too much for any one person. So that is not to speak for people who call, but I would say that's the thing I get the most, right? Like help me figure out where to begin because I really don't know.
Gotcha. Okay, so story time. The skill that I had the hardest time with, especially in college, because I lived on campus and I was by myself, was speaking up for myself because I don't like asking for help. And I had to ask for accommodations in the classroom and all that stuff by myself. So how would DRR teach someone or to speak up for themselves?
I think it's a really great question because just a little bit of a shout out. Tomorrow is the start of Disability Pride Month, and thinking about the way that fits into asking for accommodations and speaking up for yourself is really important because I think we spend a lot of time thinking about, I don't want to say downsides to having a disability, but the barriers, right, that we have to navigate,
Right.
and people inherently not understanding those barriers. So automatically when you have to go ask for an accommodation to someone, you know that they're not really going to understand your needs. You're going to have to try to express them in a way that they can get, right? Whereas within the disability community itself, most of the time we don't have to explain it to each other, which is valuable as a community. I think one of the things that helps the most on staff is having a staff of mostly people with disabilities. So we've already been through that ourselves. We are all also, I would say, pretty noisy and outspoken, but and I think we've learned that in various ways. And we speak up in sort of systemic advocacy spaces too, like at the state level with the city. And I think modeling that by example is really helpful to people because when we invite them to come to advocacy training or advocacy meetings about what's going on in the state or whatever it may be, we don't tell them that they have to talk, and they don't, right? Like nobody has to speak at those except the people who have already planned to speak, right? But they do hear, I think more and more it gets reinforced, right? The problem are the barriers. It's not the individual with the disability. The problem is society, not you. And to me, that's a big part of Disability Pride Month is once you kind of internalize that, right? Like the problem is what's going on in the world or what's going on at my university, not me being burdensome speaking up for myself, right? You start to feel a little more comfortable saying, hey, society, you should figure this out because this isn't my problem to figure out. This is your problem to figure out. And it gives people self-confidence. That obviously is a lifelong journey, right? Like I get it wrong all the time, right? There are things I should speak up about that I don't. I think we all do that. But I learn with people that I speak to too, like, here's something I should do a little better advocating for myself on, right? And I'll just tell them that.
Right.
I'm not like, I am the best at advocating, right? We're all learning together. And I think that helps the most.
Okay, so I'm not sure if these are happening right now because COVID.
Yeah.
But for skills like cooking and like running a home, where does that training usually take place?
So cooking is usually at the office. We have a kitchen and sort of like a dining space too, but it's a full kitchen with an oven, microwave, all that stuff. So that's where we had done cooking lessons in the past. Once we resume, or hopefully once we resume normal operations, I do home visits if I get to know somebody, right? Like I wouldn't just go to someone's house that I'd never met before, but like once I have a conversation with people. And for me, it's the best way to kind of get an assessment of what their house is like, right? Because our our office kitchen is great, but it's also not the kitchen they have, right? Like maybe their cabinets are too high or their stove isn't accessible or a million different things. So one thing I always say is people with disabilities are really creative in figuring out how to get around, right? I remember when I first became a part-time wheelchair user, I lived in an apartment where the bathroom door was too narrow, and I put a computer chair stool in there and just went, wee, like to get through.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, obviously not everyone can come up with those solutions, but not everyone can move or get home modification either. So talking to people about what they would be comfortable with to make their lives a little easier, right? I spoke with a gentleman once who really had trouble putting on shoes and socks, and we talked about getting one of those gadgets that helps you pull them up and just like different accommodations like that. But I wouldn't have seen that without going into his house, right? Without him thinking, okay, here's where I have the most trouble in this room, right? I'm having trouble getting around. So that has helped me a lot to kind of see, and I don't want to say assess because that's a very kind of social worker way of putting it, but to kind of help assess someone's needs, right? Like, I mean, whether it's a doorway or whether it's just not being able to get around well. And I think people appreciate the one-on-one of it too. Just sort of, it's more like inviting over company instead of like having a government official knock on your door, right? It's just like, I'm coming here to try to help figure out how to navigate life. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How frequently does DRR have contact with an individual that are learning these specific skills?
I would say pretty often. You too, Heather? I wanted to ask you too, because you get, I mean, like the first calls, but especially lately, it's been on the rise, and I think some of that is like new disabilities from COVID or COVID related too. But I would say I end up working with people I hadn't talked to before each week. I mean, like it's pretty common now to end up with new folks and a lot of the issues are so very similar, right? That people face. Like it's not, there really aren't odd ones out, and housing is still at the top of the list. But I would say it's fairly often, and most of what people need help with is just navigating it all, right? Like figuring it out.
Are there any applications to apply for either independent living skills or the info and referral services?
Oh, Heather, I think you're muted.
I think you're muted.
Oh, there.
There you
Sorry
go.
about that. So generally what we recommend is if somebody is comfortable, they can go online to drradvocates.org, which is our website. And across the top, there's a green toolbar, and one of those headings across the top of the green toolbar is the heading for services, and you drop that down, The first thing up under there is the application for services, and it's pretty straightforward. The first couple of sheets are like all of your demographic information, and then you get into like some questions, some little yes no questions with a little example of independent living skills and the different services we offer. It gives a little example, and so therefore it's easier for people to check yes or no that way. But if they prefer, like, I would say if I didn't have a computer, that I wouldn't prefer to fill out an application like that on my phone or my tablet. So
Right.
a lot of times people are like, I just need help. So they can always call me, and I'm glad to help them fill the application out on a larger computer screen, you know, versus like their phone or their tablet or something, because especially people with motor skill type disabilities, I'm one of those people, so I don't prefer to do lengthy things on my tablet or my phone.
Right.
And so I do understand, and so I will help somebody if they need help filling out the application for services. But if they just call me and they're like, if you can just get me there, then I can do it. Then I will tell them, um, you know, go to drradvocates.org and drop the box down that says services, and I will get them there and they'll say, okay, well, I'm good to go. And so I tell them, fine, that's cool. So if you run into any issues while completing it, you can call me and we'll talk about it. And so some people do it that way, and some people prefer to have me help them. And I'm willing to do that. And they can call me at 205-815-6151. That's my direct line. Or they can call Sparrow, our receptionist, at 251-2223. Ask for me, Heather Sims, ask for the information and referral specialist, or ask for extension 119, and they will give me. And if they happen to get my voicemail, they can just leave a message and I will call them back. And if I have other things on my schedule, I will schedule an appointment and say I'll call you back at 1 o'clock and we'll complete the application for services. I'm usually very clear, and I like to make sure before I start an application for services with somebody that I'm going to have adequate time to hear them out, to put it exactly like they say when I'm talking to them. And I don't want to rush somebody in getting their story out, or what they need. Usually a lot of times it is their full story while I'm doing the application. And it does take a little bit of time, so I kind of say like 30 minutes per application. Sometimes it doesn't take that long, but if somebody is telling their story in the midst of telling me what I need for the application, then sometimes it can take a little longer, and that's fine.
Right.
So that is generally what we recommend on both sides. Like, just for the information and referral piece of it, somebody doesn't have to fill out the application for services. They can just call me, or call the switchboard and ask for me. Like, because generally if somebody just wants a piece of information, they don't want to go through filling out all the demographic stuff and all that necessarily. Now, if it's information that they want plus like independent living skills, then they would need to complete the application for services, because that would get them in touch with Nikki to start the rest of the process to help them get their larger goals met. Or like our employment specialist who, they need information for housing, but while they're talking to me, they find out we have employment services available, and they're like, oh yeah, I really want that too.
Right.
And so that's generally what happens a lot, is we get those types of calls where they're not really they call for one thing, they're not really sure what we provide. So in the midst of the conversation, they're like, oh yeah, I want all of that, or I only want pieces of that. So that's where the application for services comes in.
What does the application look like for independent living services, and what is the criteria?
So it's just the basic application that anybody needing any of our services would complete, and the application has like little examples of independent living skills training. It has like a little example of what that looks like, and then employment and the other services that we offer, and it's kind of like a check or put a bubble in the yes or no spot, and then once you do that, then you'll be connected to the staff people that you select yes for, like advocacy, or like peer support, or like independent living skills, or employment, or home modification. You'll be connected to those staff people once you complete that application. And if you select no, then the employment specialist won't call you. Only Nikki will call you if you select like independent living skills. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. Did you want to say anything, Nikki?
I was just going to say, I think the big question on the application that's more related to independent living, but like Heather said, it's the same application, right? Like there's this application for like all these different services that we offer, but describe how your disability affects your ability to function independently in your home, community, or work, I think is probably the key spot where people would talk about what they need help with and what kinds of goals that they would want to set. With a peer advocate or independent living skills specialist in training. So I think that's the space that makes the most sense. And there are questions about your living arrangement too, like living in assisted living, living with family and friends, and those kinds of things. But I think the description space is where you can tell your story and talk about what your goals are, if you have them. And if you don't, we can figure those out together too, right? Like sometimes people don't come and say, I want to do this. Like, I don't know what I need, and then we kind of get there together.
Gotcha. All right, I think that was all of my questions. Let's see if there's anything in the chat. There's actually a lot in the chat. Let's see. Disability Resource Network said, good morning.
Hi.
Let's see. Disability Rights and Resources said, well said, Heather. I think that was when you were talking about what in not independent living, referral services you offer. Disability Rights and Resources also said, great example. I think that was when Nikki was talking about like the drive-through example. Nikki put the application for services. Nikki put the DRR phone number. Disability Rights and Resources put Heather's number and the main phone line.
Multitasking over here.
It happens. we all seem to be pretty good at it.
We've learned through the pandemic too, right? Sometimes you got to type things in one place and talk in another, and it's,
Right. It's what Zoom has done for us. I think that was everything. Do y'all want to say anything else?
I just want to thank Alabama Care for giving us the opportunity to speak on behalf of Disability Rights and Resources and the services that we have, and encourage folks, if they don't know where to turn, to start with us. We are compassionate, caring, empathetic people, also trying to navigate the square peg round hole approach, square peg being person with a disability and the round hole being the world, trying to navigate that system. That's kind of the way I feel as a person with a disability. Many different times in my life, square peg and round hole, the round hole being the world, and trying to navigate it. So if that is you, please reach out to us. We are a team of ready and willing staff members to hear you out and to get you to the right places to get the help that you desire.
Heather said it all. I'm not even going to try to follow that other than to say thank you. That was amazing. It was perfect. But yeah, thank you for having us today.
You're welcome. I learned a lot that I had no idea.
That's good.
Let's see, anything else before we go? Sharon Glenn Henderson said, "Great information, thank you."
Thanks again for this, Sarah. It was much appreciated.
Anytime. I'm glad that I was able to interview you.
Us too.
Yeah, I think that is it. So, I guess we can say goodbye and end unless there's something else. Nothing else. Alright, thanks for joining, y'all. I'll see you later.
Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.